the international papers.
That's right.
So you're here for the International Press Review. What's the first story?
Well, we're talking about yet again, another day talking about the bombings in Boston. We're talking about the security measures underway. We're going to start off a couple of stories on that particular issue. The first of which looks at how easy it is. It's a Telegraph we're talking about here, looking at how easy it is for extremists, for jihadists, for right-wing anarchists to come up with the crude elements to make a very cheap and rough and ready bomb. And that was obviously what they had in Boston. You know, they discovered the shrapnel created by a pressure cooker. In this article, the Telegraph talks about how it's the item of choice, actually, for a lot of people. The instructions can be read online, and they use pressure cookers, it says in this article, because it can maximize damage, and very cheaply indeed. And so the amount of shrapnel generated from a pressure cooker is actually partly to explain, it explains in part the number of amputees that were left out of that grisly attack in Boston.
And now Slate looks at the other end of the spectrum, the ramifications of the bombing for security in the U.S.
Yes. Slate is talking about that delicate balance that the government has to constantly strive for between improving security on the one hand without perhaps infringing on the liberties of individuals on the other. And the Slate actually says that by and large, since 9/11, 2001, the government has, first under Bush and then under Obama, they have pretty much got it right on that. They haven't infringed, but they go on to detail a couple of the events that have happened over the past decade, which have nevertheless changed permanently the kind of the regime, the security regime. Such they mentioned, for example, the failed shoe bomber way back in 2001. Now, as a result, we all take off our shoes when we go through airports. And then back in 2006, an attempt to bring down a commercial airliner using liquid explosive. As a result, we can't buy a bottle of water and bring it on the plane anymore. So on the one hand, they're saying it hasn't been extreme or oppressive, but on the other, they do point to a number of measures that have changed, but they specify that these have all happened in airports, and they say it'll be harder to institute these kinds of changes, sweeping changes, in a public place, like the streets at the finish line of a marathon. For example.
And you didn't mention the underwear bomber in 2009.
For example, and that's a very good example because that's why they started to deploy full body scanners. I mean, and it seems as though we're due though for another check because as you look at that timeline, it's every 3 years or so there's been some momentous change.
Now, in Washington, there's no danger of overreach regarding gun laws, though. The papers are reporting on the failure of a bill to strengthen gun controls. Barack Obama called it a shameful day for Washington.
Yes, rarely do we see him that emotional, but he was quite angry about it, and perhaps for a good reason. If we look at the New York Times cartoon, we can see here that the NRA has set up shop, and the New York Times, all the papers have been talking about this for much of the week, and The Economist goes on in particular to talk about basically how the NRA is just one of several large groups that has managed to have senators in thrall. Now, if we go on to The Guardian, it goes on to make a much more robust point. It says that of the 45 senators who essentially killed that bill on Wednesday, I'll recap in a second as to what it entailed, but 42 of the 45 senators were found out to have received some money from the NRA or another pro-gun lobbying group. So, in other words, it's an investigation that was undertaken by The Guardian and a non-profit organization known as the Sunlight Foundation, and they found that there's a high number of senators that are in the thrall of the pro-gun lobby.
All right, Kyle Brown with the International Press Review. That's all the time we have for now. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
On set, the International Press Review. Thanks.